I met Paul and said, do you want to join my band, you know? And then George joined. And then Ringo joined. We were just a band who made it very, very big, that's all.
Hello there, my name's Scott, and welcome to Dig a Podcast, a show in which I give you an in-depth story behind the songs sung by the best band there is, was, and ever will be, the Beatles. In this season, Season 2, we work our way through the album Meet the Beatles, or our UK listeners know it as With the Beatles. Meet the Beatles is the second Beatles album released in the United States. It was the first US Beatles album to be issued by Capitol Records on 20th of January 1964 in both mono and stereo formats. It topped the popular album chart on the 15th of February 1964 and remained at number 1 for 11 weeks before being replaced by the Beatles' second album. The cover featured Robert Freeman's iconic portrait of the Beatles used in the UK for the With the Beatles, with a blue tint added to the original stark black and white photograph. Let's continue with track 5 from Meet the Beatles.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All I've Got to Do. With all of the creative songwriting output from Lennon and McCartney team in 1963, as well as the magnitude of their incredibly busy schedule during the beginnings of their catapult to fame, it is only expected that a song or two might not receive the attention it deserved, even if that song is a masterpiece. This is truly the case with the beautifully written All I've Got to Do, that the average Beatles fan of today hasn't heard of this song. It rarely, if ever, gets any radio play. It has never appeared on any compilation or greatest hits package. It's almost never featured in any Beatles tribute band set. Even the Beatles themselves viewed it with little regard. In their entire career, this song was only in their focus for one day, the day that it was recorded. After that day, the song was never brought up or thought about again. Even in interviews about their songwriting throughout the rest of their lives, both Lennon and McCartney barely mentioned a word about the song. All this being the case, there is an understandable aura of mystery surrounding this song, especially so because of its undeniable likability. Once introduced to the song, it's hard for the listener to dismiss as just a filler track for the album. It has a classy appeal that suggests it could have attracted much more attention than it did. With the analysis of this podcast, it is only hoped that a greater appreciation of this song will be achieved. This podcast will surely contain the most information you'll ever find about the song, which, in most Beatlemaniacs' opinions, is truly deserved. Songwriting history. The only indication made in print as to the time of this song was written was given by author Steve Turner, suggesting some time in the year 1961. While this very well could be the case, what is known is that the Beatles never performed the song live throughout their career. Whether in their formative years at the Cavern or in Hamburg, nor after their fame solidified from 1963 onward. On the surface, this fact makes the 1961 claim seem unlikely, since this claim cannot be substantiated from any other sources of this writing. An undeniable fact is that the Beatles had the habit of utilizing every original composition in their live sets throughout the early years. But, to play devil's advocate, we must consider that, since it has been established that this is the 100% Lennon composition, he could have held the song close to his chest throughout those formative years, and only pulled it out when the new composition was sorely needed in their second British album. Either way, what is known is that Paul, George and Ringo were entirely unaware of the existence of the song on the day that they were introduced to it in the studio when it was recorded. This studio procedure of introducing a new song on the day of the recording session was totally new to the Beatles up to this point, although it became much more of a standard piece as time went on. The pressure of finishing a second album before the end of 1963 may have appeared as a daunting task, which may have instigated the desperate act of Lennon purging his memory to reveal this gem. Similar desperate acts happen in later years for the same reason, such as with the beautiful Michelle for the Rubber Soul album at the end of 1965. Another help in determining the time of writing is to examine the influences of inspiration for the song. A rare quote from Lennon concerning the song reveals that it was his attempt at trying to do a Smokey Robinson again. His influence with the music of the Miracles is quite evident on this second British album, with the Beatles. Much of John's songwriting style on the album has been admittedly inspired by Robinson, as well as doing an excellent cover of their recent 1963 top 10 hit, You've Really Got a Hold on Me. Especially noteworthy in All I've Got to Do, though, is the influence of the Miracles' 1959 song, You Can Depend on Me, with its lyrical similarity and its introductory suspended fourth chord. Being highly influenced by his musical heroes at this point, traces of other influences can also be detected in this Lennon original. The soulful songwriting of Arthur Alexander, John's professed favourite singer of the time, can easily be seen throughout the chord structure, melody line, singing style, and arrangement. It has also been suggested that his obsession with early 60s girl groups, most notably the Shirelles' 1962 hit Baby It's You, which they covered on their first album, can be heard, as well as early songs by the Drifters. Since both Arthur Alexander's career and the Shirelles' Baby It's You appeared in 1962, their influence may have been only in the singing style and arrangement of the song If All I've Got to Do was indeed completely written by 1961. This, of course, is left to guesswork, but nonetheless paints a more detailed picture as to the songwriting history of the track. One final argument in favour of the songs being written at a later date, such as September of 1963, is the fact that it was written with American audiences in mind. The depiction of calling a girl on the phone was something that was common with US teenagers in the early 60s, but not in Britain. So Lennon purposely put this in to appeal to the youth of America. For instance, regarding the song No Reply, which also mentioned calling a girl on the phone, Lennon states, I have never called a girl in my life because phones weren't a part of the English child's life. It should also be noted, however, that the top 10 1960 hit, That's All You Gotta Do, by Brenda Lee, has remarkably similar lyrics, right down to the plea to call me on the telephone. Therefore, this song is likely to have been an influence in writing All I've Got to Do, even if only subliminally, keeping in mind that Brian Epstein had actually approached Lennon and McCartney in September of 1963 to encourage them to write songs with US audiences in mind, which led to I Wanna Hold Your Hand being written in this month. It seems quite convincing to conclude that All I've Got to Do was also written at this time. Nevertheless, it has been admitted that with memories hazing from the passing of time and the untimely death of John Lennon in 1980, there may always be a degree of uncertainty concerning when the song was actually written. Recording history. Two recording sessions, July 18th and July 30th, 1963, had transpired, which resulted in just over half of their second British album with the Beatles being completed. Approximately a month and a half later, on September 11th, the Beatles reconvened at EMI Studio 2 to start work on the second half of the album. Since 6 of the 8 previously recorded tracks from the new album were cover songs, the primary focus on this day was newly written original compositions. 5 new songs were recorded on this day, but only 2 of them were finished, All I've Got to Do being one of them. The afternoon session of this day started at 2:30 p.m, being with aborted attempts at 2 new songs, I Wanna Be Your Man and Little Child. After it was decided to leave both of these songs for another day, work started on All I've Got to Do at approximately 3:30 p.m. After John introduced it for the first time to the other Beatles, they recorded 14 live takes of the song. 8 of these takes were false starts, which is evidence in itself that they were unfamiliar with this composition. After one overdub, quite possibly the introductory guitar chord from George, this take 15 became the finished song as we know it, and the Beatles never played it again. That completed the afternoon recording session at 6 p.m. While the band were on vacation out of the country, George Martin, with Norman Smith and Jeff Emmerich as engineers, produced the mono mix of the song on September 30th, 1963. The same 3 staff members created the stereo mix on October 29th, with the engineer assistance of the mysterious BT. Thanks for listening to Dig a Podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform. This has been a Team Wilco production. Until next time, if you know what I mean. Do I did? No? Okay.